Okay, we are now live. Do you notice anything different? No split screen. We're together in person at the IEA Conference in San Francisco. We're so excited to be here. So today's topic or at least one person's here. Hello.
Well, we got two people.
Today's topic, by your own choice, is BDSM and Kink. So the relationship of Enneagram type and instinct with alternative sexualities. So we chose that for two reasons. Like I just said, it was one of the top 2 topics on our poll. So you guys really wanted to hear about this. Diet Smoking Coke says, so weird not seeing you on a split screen. I know, it is weird. It's awesome. So for one reason we chose it is because you guys wanted to see it. And the other reason is because we're in San Francisco, which is a historically very kink-friendly city, and one of the sort of origin cities of the leather community, along with LA and New York. So there's a long history of BDSM and kink here in San Francisco. So we wanted to do a topical topic while we're here. So let's get started with just some background. So what is BDSM and kink? Because there are a lot of different definitions and people have different conceptions of it. So BDSM itself is acronyms bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism. So it's a whole family of practices that involve the consensual, very important, consensual exchange of power, pain, bondage, humiliation, role play, restraint, for the purposes of creating pleasure. And it actually does not have to be sexual pleasure specifically, although for many, or even most, that is a part of it, but it can be any kind of pleasure or positive sensation, basically, is usually the goal. Kink is related, but encompasses a greater variety of things. So kinks can be anything that sort of turns you on sexually that, generally speaking, isn't considered to be normal, traditional sexual stimuli. So the ones, I don't want to start naming them because we'll be here all day. There's basically infinite kinks, but the ones you probably heard of a lot would be like foot fetishes, or people can have kinks for bondage, which then overlaps with BDSM. There's so many, I'm not going to just try to name them because we'll be here all day. So that's background. And then Lindsay's going to talk a little bit about kind of philosophy or some perspective on, what's the ethical perspective on this.
Yeah, I think that, in our culture, what can happen is there's a lot of perspectives that something with kink or BDSM is fringe, or there's something unhealthy or not okay with sort of the enjoyment or engagement in that. And one of the things that's been huge, like in my therapy practice, is that all sexual behaviors are normal and healthy as long as they are consensual and you're choosing to engage. Of course, that might mean, if I am engaging in a kink or fetish because someone else wants me to, that can be more complex, but the actual desire and want for those things is completely normal and healthy. And I think that a lot of times what we get mixed messages in society as well, because we do get mixed messages that some of these types of behaviors can be compulsivity or addiction issues, or that there has been trauma or other these types of things that influence and affect it. And yes, those things can exist as well, but it's much, much more complex than that. And so what I always tell my clients in my office, and this is a really common phrase that a lot of the sex therapists will say in Minneapolis. I know some of you are sex therapists in Minneapolis that probably see this as well, but it's like, don't yuck someone else's yum. What is hot and enjoyable and pleasurable for someone else may not be for you, but it's not really your place to judge that, and realizing that what one person likes is about what they like, and there isn't judgment around what that is. and understanding what's about you and what's about the other person. I mean, this is true with any type of growth that we're doing, right? It's like when we're often having a reaction to someone else's desire for a kink or fetish, or even, I guess we're not even going into fetishes today, that's like a whole nother thing, or BDSM, is like our own internal reactions to that often have more to say about ourselves than it does about the person that enjoys engaging in that. So a lot of that becomes your own work and understanding of like, why do I have these judgments or thoughts about what other people like and desire?
Relatedly, I want to say a word on sex positivity. So sex positivity is, at this point, essentially a philosophy that indicates that any sexual thing that you do that's consensual, like Lyndsey said, is not only okay, but it's great, it's fantastic, it's empowering, like that you're changing the world by, doing your thing. That's awesome. And actually sex positivity, I think, has its origins in California as well. So again, we're here in California, perfect topic. And my note on that is there's some nuance to that, because what we often see in kink and BDSM communities, which tend to be tight-knit and very supportive, is they have a lot of, almost you get like a self-righteousness, has a backlash against the, the incredible judgment that they can get from society. And that backlash is like, we're doing the best things ever, we're enlightened, and like everyone who judges us is wrong. And that's totally good too. But the thing is, any behavior that someone's doing can be motivated unhealthily or healthily. So any sex that anyone's having with anyone for any reason, that can be, or even masturbation, that can be motivated by healthy reasons or unhealthy reasons. So we do see that in kink and BDSM as well, just to keep that in mind and have a balanced perspective. We haven't even gone into Enneagram yet. And then the other thing I want to say is Dan Savage, who's a sex columnist, says that there's two kinds of kinky people. There are those who are born kinky, and then there are those who are made kinky. And the ones who are born kinky are the ones who, at onset of their sexual selves, which is usually, pre-puberty or right around puberty, they're already kinky. So they're already having kinky fantasies when they're young, and they're, not having been exposed to anything like pornography or hearing about these things from anyone, just comes from inside them. That's who's born kinky. Then people who are made kinky are people who are, vanilla, which would be they aren't so kinky. They get partnered with someone who's kinky, and without feeling coerced or anything, they start to experiment, and they're like, wow, I love this, it's so sexy. And then they end up being kinky for life. So two types of kinky people. And then of course there are people who are not into kinky things, which is great too. So that was a long introduction before we got into the Enneagram relationship. Okay, so we have a little bit of information on the relationship between Enneagram, kink, and BDSM. So in my study, I did collect information on this. It wasn't the sole purpose of my study, but it was just collected as like a demographic. So the most likely types to have participated in BDSM or kink, well, I'll start with types, I'll go into subtype. The most likely types is 8 and 4. And then we also see 2. To get into the subtype, we have sexual 4s at the very top. 53% of sexual 4s have engaged in BDSM or kink behaviors. Then we have sexual 8s, very close second, 52%. Social 8s, 50%. And then, surprisingly, maybe for some, sexual 5s are next, 45%. And then sexual 2s actually are tied with them at 45%. So the type overall, 8s, 4s, 4s first, 4s, 8s, and then a little bit 2s, but we also see sexual 5s sneaking in there. Conversely, the least likely to types to have participated in BDSM are our 1s and 6s, which maybe you could guess that. When we get into the subtypes, the very least likely to have participated is sexual 1s at 4%. Only 4% by their own report have ever tried a BDSM or kink behavior. Then we see social 6s, 10%, social 1s, 11%, self-preservation 1s, 15%, and self-preservation 6s at 18%. I do want to say this is self-report data, as my whole study is. And while generally speaking, because this survey was anonymous, I think that people are mostly honest. When it comes to these very highly judged things, like BDSM, and also with pornography, I saw this, I'm not 100% sure that every type and subtype is being fully forthcoming. So specifically here, we see sexual 1s saying that only 4% of them have ever tried BDSM or kink, but we know from other research and from experience, clinical experience, that sexual 1s and 1s generally do fantasize about these things, about BDSM and kink, even if they're not actualizing it. So a theory that Lyndsey and I have is that sexual 1s actually are underreporting their participation, at least by a handful of percentage points, because of type 1s, sexual 1s are going to be the most likely to be interested in these things. So that's some data. There's a little bit more. I also asked if you said yes to this question of have you participated in BDSM or kink. If yes, then have you participated in public play spaces, which is more or less BDSM kink behaviors happening with other people around. And so that's a whole, separate area of kink. You can do BDSM kink things at home, but often in these communities we have play parties, we have gatherings where it's done all together. So among the people who said yes, that they have participated, we see a lot of sexual 2s and sexual 4s saying that yes, they have also participated in public play, public BDSM play, and even some sexual 5s as well. Interestingly, the very few 1s who did admit that they participate in BDSM, a high percentage of them admitted that they also do public play. So we're talking about quite small samples at this point, but it seems to me that 1s, once they embrace this in themselves, they really embrace it. Okay, that was me talking a lot. And that's sort of all that we know from research on this topic. So Lyndsey's going to talk about some of her clinical experiences with this.
Yeah, I think that, so I agree with you that I believe that sexual 1s are underreporting, because I do see that in my office there are quite a few sexual 1s that do have some kink or engagement in BDSM, and I think that has to do a little bit with maybe some fear about, like, people are going to know that I'm putting this on a survey, and perhaps when they're in my physical office there's more space and place to really kind of have that and have that honesty there, knowing that it's going to be, private in the therapy office or room or space. It's really interesting to me too, because it's like by far sexual 4s are the ones engaging in all different types of kinks and fetishes and BDSM in a variety of different ways. And I think it's just a really, because I think you kind of assume that this is going to be 8s, which they do too, but I actually see sexual 4s like so much more even than like my 8s that are in my office. One of the things that I found really interesting as well for clients is like I have quite a few people that see me that are also parts of roping communities, and a lot of them actually tend to be like social, so it's like social dominant with the sexual instinct second. And one of the things that reasons I believe this might be happening or occurring, I know that you don't have the exact research on like what this looks like, but when you think about a roping community, right, there's rules, there's structure, there's status, there's expectations of what's going to happen around that. I'm thinking of in particular Social One that I saw that was part of this community. And so there's sort of that like structure and the capacity to kind of like go into sort of to know what to expect, and then having that community around you that you can connect on and support and have sort of in that kind of kink that they're engaging in, sort of within that as well. So I think that was really interesting to me as I've been seeing more people. On the other end, what I think is really interesting too is when I see couples, is like when I have someone that might have like the sexual instinct in the third position, repressed or blind, depending on sort of how you look at that or think about that. There is oftentimes some like uncomfortability of like kind of moving into a kink or a BDSM practice with somebody. And a lot of times it's because they're not really sure like what to do, or there's uncomfortability like embodying sort of like letting go and spontaneity and just going with the experience. And so you're going to see a lot of times some hesitation, and it comes into my practice quite frequently where I might have one person that either is identifying as a sexual or social, but they've got that social sexual dynamic in the beginning, and maybe they have a partner that has the sexual instinct in the third position, really wanting them to engage more in sort of these different types of experiences, and a lot of hesitation, or maybe even some fear, or like not wanting the intensity that sometimes kind of comes with that. And I think that that's a really interesting kind of perspective as well. So finding that sexual instinct to repress people might be, not that they're not willing, but they're like, don't know what to do, I guess is kind of how I would say that. And so then they're hesitant to kind of move into those types of experiences. But it's not, I think it's really important to recognize that this isn't about them not wanting to do it. It's more about uncomfortability and not sure like how to let go enough to get the pleasurable experience from that. So you're looking at more like your social self-preservers or your self-preservers and socials that might struggle a little bit more with that type of a sexual experience. And I wanted to go back to one thing that Sam said too when she was talking about sort of like, having positive sexuality, because it goes the other way, right? Sometimes people that are into kink think that they can kind of take this like, we're better, we're more enlightened, we have more experiences around sex. And as many of you know, like I have really been coming into this world to really highlight sort of the sexual instinct repressed or blind experience, in the sense of like vanilla sex is just as good of sex as kink sex. And what I tell people all the time is like, what I want you to be doing is engaging in sex that feels pleasurable and good for you. And so like even when I entered the sexual community with ASEC, like I'm kind of out of place. Like this isn't what I enjoy. And there can be these messages sometimes like, if you're not into this, you're sexually repressed. If you're not into this, this is not good enough sex. And what I want to be really clear here is all sex is good sex. And I really liked the fact that you said that, Sam, because I think sometimes the sexuality world in general tends to be more sexual instinct dominant, and we forget to say that like vanilla sex is great sex. Kinky sex is great sex. BDSM sex, which again, it's not necessarily sex related, it's just pleasure related. All these things are good. There's not a right or a wrong, or one's better than the other, but I see this happen so many times. It's like, if I'm in the kink world, those vanilla sex people, right? And if you're vanilla sex, like, those, kinky people. And it's like, we gotta get beyond that and just like honor, like all of us have ways that we experience and have pleasure, and they're all valuable and they're all important, and we need to stop judging each other for what we like.
End the dichotomy. I love that.
Yeah.
So I got a really insightful comment which says, I wonder if the sexual twos are in their participation in BDSM is so high because they have this strong desire for intimacy, like finding new ways to achieve intimacy, or are they more willing to do what their partner wants, and that's why, because they're people pleasing. So that's a super fantastic question. That's actually one of the areas for future research that I highlight in my dissertation, which is we see this really high, very high, unexpectedly high participation of sexual twos in BDSM. Future research needs to find out, is it because their partners want to, or is it because they want to, or is it motivated by, a hope for intimacy or what? As we've started talking to people about this, there's quite a few sexual twos who said, no, this is my thing. Like, I'm into this. I got my partner into kink. So from just anecdotal, a little bit of early informal research, it actually seems like sexual twos are quite into BDSM and kink themselves. And we have to remember sexual twos are not the stereotype of two as much. So sexual twos, we don't have quite as much of this like effusive, over-giving. They have that internally, but you don't see that as much on the surface. So they're wired a little bit differently than the other two subtypes of two, and that could be sort of part of the explanation for that. Lyndsey, do you have anything to add about sexual twos?
I mean, I completely agree with exactly what you're saying. I've seen actually quite a few sexual twos in my practice, and it's interesting enough, like they oftentimes are the person bringing in the kink. I'm actually thinking of a dynamic where it was a self-preserver 7 and a sexual 2, and I've actually seen this dynamic a few times, and it was the 2. It was not the 7 sort of bringing that in and wanting that and needing that. And again, this is where we get back to like instinctual stacking, right? And like what are different stacking is going to look like. So when we think of even 7s, for instance, 7s are typically really adventurous and open to all kinds of different things until you get the self-preservation 7. So it's just a really interesting sort of perspective of kind of how that can happen as well. But yes, it's really interesting that question was asked, because the sexual 2s are the ones that they like it and they're bringing it in. It isn't just the following that you might see with the other two, because 2s can use sex as a way to earn love, but it's a little bit different with sexual 2s. It's just, they still do that mechanism sometimes, but their pleasure, a lot of them are really into sort of some like, I see the sadomasochism type dynamic a little bit more in particular.
And do you know what role in that do sexual 2s usually choose to have? Like, are they the recipient or the provider of pain and sensations?
They want to be the recipient, in my experience.
That's what I would have guessed.
Yeah.
So a couple things came up for me from what you were just saying. So about 7s, I hypothesized that 7s would be really high participants in BDSM and kink because of their adventurous nature, because generally speaking, they will try anything sexual once. But you heard in the top 5 subtypes of who try BDSM, 7s was not in it. 7s are actually, relatively high. Like if I went down, to the top 7 subtypes, they would be in there. But we have the 4, 8, 5, and 2 actually above. So, and specifically sexual 5, sexual 2. Same exact thing with sexual 5. There wasn't a question asked about this, but 5s generally, as the stereotype as a whole, are pretty low interest in BDSM and kink, but sexual 5s quite high. So we have with both 2 and 5, the differences in the sexual subtype are really pronounced, at least in this way. So we're going to move into just chatting and kind of have some speculation, because we've sort of reached the end of our expertise. This is an emerging area that not very much research nor clinical work has been done. So this is now just our best guesses about roles that different types have. But generally from people I've talked to and from my understanding, we have 8s are taking, the topping role, right? The giver of sensation, the loosely the controller of what's going on, although if you know these communities, it's really the receiver who's sort of controlling, because it's their consent that's controlling it. So we see 8s are tops, 7s more likely to be tops. 4s, sexual 4s, definitely bottoms. They definitely want to be, the recipient of pain, the person who's tied up, not the tie-er. And from what Lyndsey's saying, it sounds like 2s also like to be the recipients this is broad stereotypes. And if you are in these communities and you don't fit the stereotype, please message us. We love to learn from you. Nines, very intriguingly, there are a lot of nines in these communities, which you wouldn't think. And I've seen nines are switches, meaning that they can be either role. And the reason for that, I would speculate, has to do with nines, their ability to accommodate. It's like if their partner wants to be a bottom, the nine's like, okay, I'll learn how to be a top, and vice versa. And then the comment was, I would think sexual 2 is basically down for whatever regarding intimacy and how to achieve it. So that's a good point too. Lyndsey, what do you have to add here?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting because I think, like you said, with the nines are kind of quiet and you don't anticipate or expect. But in particular, again, the social, sexual nines are really open to sort of everything and anything. And it is interesting. It's a switch. It's not, it's like, do you want me to? Sure. And I'll be the receiver of pleasure? Sure. And it's like this back and forth that can happen and occur. And I think nines are just interesting because we don't share unless we're asked about things. And so I think that it's just lovely that you're doing all this research because you're asking the questions and they're answering them. But otherwise you would have no idea.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, we're getting towards the end. There's something I want to add here. So going back to the idea of judgment of these communities, which we have seen historically a lot of judgment and a lot of marginalization of especially public BDSM and kink communities. And like Lyndsey said, it's swung a little bit now where in some circles it's like the other way of like vanilla sex is bad, but 9, still waters run deep. I love that comment. So true. So what I want to say is, there has been this historical idea that, intentionally engaging in pain or these sensations is like there's something wrong or it's, depraved about it. But actually, throughout the history of the world, basically, in multiple cultures, there are specific rituals around receiving pain to support transcendent states. So you see these rituals in Native communities, different communities, this purposeful engagement in pain to reach transcendent states. Well, a lot of people who regularly engage in this lifestyle report that they reach trance states. They have completely spiritually merged states. They have transcendent states. There's a specific type of trance state called subspace, which is where a bottom or a sub, the recipient of pain or sensation, sort of leaves themselves and they go into this state of trance that's most people report as absolute peace, relaxation, and like a communion with something larger than themselves. And you see this also with tops. They call it top space. So just to bring another layer in here, there's this spiritual side also of BDSM and kink that's not often known by the broader community. Lyndsey, you have anything to add generally?
I don't think so, but I feel like, again, like all these topics that we're talking about, like there's so much more we could share, and we can just like touch the surface, and continue to send us your ideas and topics and things that you want, because we want to be bringing to you, but like it's just like we can just brush the surface. Like every time we've been doing this, like we just brush the surface. And I'm like, we could go all into the roping community, or we could go all more in depth in BDSM, but it's just I'm just really glad that we're having the opportunity to kind of bring this to people.
That reminds me of one more thing, since we have 1 minute left. We didn't talk as much about instinct. You mentioned about the social dominance with the roping. In my experience, you see sexual dominance reporting, well, in research for sure, you see sexual dominance reporting highest interest and highest participation in BDSM. But you see social dominance reporting highest interest in the communities of BDSM. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to what Lyndsey said of there's rules, there's hierarchies, I know my role, there's community. So we see that's a whole nother lie. We could probably do just on instincts with this topic, but we're out of time already for this episode. So thanks to everyone for tuning in on a not First Friday, on Sexy Third Friday. And we'll be back with you guys in August.
And I was just going to say, like, I saw a lot of engagement today, and I love the questions and the things, and just kind of seeing all of you on there as well. And like, we are really excited to see you next month in August. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining. Bye.